very close to that, and we may have some dialogue on that at a later date, depending on where we need to go with the budget. Will the district receive more state aid once New York State passes its budget? The discussion in Albany right now is to take $200 million of the $250 million in competitive grants that the governor had set aside and put that back into foundation aid. The proposals from both the Senate and Assembly guarantee at least 1% increase in the district's foundation aid because of that change. So we are projecting, and you will see tonight, the addition of $150,000 in revenue from state aid. Again, the timeliness of the state budget is important here. We're scheduled to adopt our budget on April 17th. The state is expected to approve their budget hopefully before April 1, but again, timing is certainly an issue in this situation. The next piece is on AP programs. We don't have, or currently we offer 14 AP courses at the high school. At this time, you'll see in our high school reductions from the phase 1, we have draft 1 reductions from the high school outlined this evening. You'll see that only one will be proposed to be eliminated in the 2012-13 budget, and that is due to enrollment and not due to necessarily financial issues. Again, on athletics, what teams are being eliminated under the 50,000 reduction? And again, at this time, no teams are being recommended to be eliminated. We're studying the possibility of the booster club and raising the required funds through that. And again, that can be done throughout the year. It doesn't mean that your required funds have to be in place on July 1. These can take place throughout the year as well. Last question that we put up there is, how is it possible to develop a budget without contracts in place with employee bargaining groups? We do have a tentative agreement with our administrators, the Hamburg Administrative Councils, that has been reached. The tentative agreement includes a wage freeze for 2012-13. We are continuing to negotiate with other bargaining units for their contracts that either expired on June 30th of 2010 or will expire June 30th of 2012. I believe all parties are working hard. This type of agreement takes time, but we do, again, hope to have tentative agreements in place at least that can have an impact on the budget. Again, that deadline is April 17th, and we have our scheduled budget adoption. Barbara, I turn it over to you for the financial review.
Sure. One last time, we're going to show you the slide that says now the submitted tax levy limitation calculation. This is actually what was submitted on March 1st. So you won't necessarily need to review it again. I like to start with it so you can always see the tax levy limitations prior to exclusions. The next slide, we'll outline the exclusions. I know you've seen this also before. The total levy before exclusions, the exclusions in $314,697, which really in our case is primarily for debt service, which is the portion of our debt that we're obligated to pay back capital projects that we do not receive aid on. So that's the portion that was approved by the voters. They already agreed to pay it when they approved the capital project. That's why this is considered an exclusion, and that's why it's something that we need to include when we consider our total levy limitation, our total levy. Our tax levy limit plus exclusions is $31,803,220. We'll come back to this number in the next couple slides. There's several parts to building a budget. Fund balance, appropriation budgets for the upcoming year, and a revenue budget for the upcoming year. And really, you have to look at all the component pieces. They all fit together as a puzzle. The first thing you really have to look at, and early, it's a little difficult, but you have to look at, is your estimated fund balance for the current fiscal year that you're in. The fund balance on the books really doesn't change at all until you get to the end of the fiscal year. So you have to do some projecting during the year, looking at where you think your expenses are going to end up, where you think your revenues are going to end up. Because that's what you need to use. You need to use that information to determine how much you're going to have at the end of the year to appropriate to offset taxes. That number can change every year depending on the circumstances. It's early, but, this is a pretty good snapshot of where we think we're going to end up. Our unexpended appropriations, basically what we're not going to expend out of the budget. We believe to be somewhere around 1.7, almost $1.8 million. That would be great, except that we have what we're going to call overstated revenue. The revenue budget was overstated. There's a lot of different reasons this happens. One thing you always have to remember is when you're setting up your revenue budget, it is a projection. You really don't know what you're going to get. Even the runs that you get from the state say a projection or an estimate, there's no guarantee. So the revenue budget was somewhat overstated, so we think at the end of the year, we're not going to meet all of our revenues that we're going to get. Somewhere in the neighborhood of $650,000 short. Just back up a little bit, one of the reasons the unexpended appropriations budget isn't higher is that we did have some unanticipated costs. Some things that we had to pay in 11 and 12 that were not necessarily anticipated. For example, we had very large St. Mary's bill this year of $145,000.
There's like what?
St. Mary's for the deaf.
St. Mary's.
And there's no school district that budgeted for that because after the fiscal year began, the rules were changed on how those bills would be paid. And that a lot of money was pushed off to school districts that used to otherwise be paid by the state to finance. So we didn't know that in the budget, nobody did, that's just one example. So like I said, it's not an exact science because there's so much that they can't control. So if you take your unexpended appropriation number and you subtract out what we think we're going to be short, you get $1.1 million. We have had different numbers that we've appropriated over the years to reduce the tax levy. But this year, based on what we're looking at as projected fund balance, would be my recommendation to the superintendent and to the board that we appropriate somewhere in the neighborhood of $750,000 as an offset to the property tax levy for 12-13. That would leave us with an undesignated fund balance, which used to be called the unappropriated fund balance, which we changed it over, say undesignated, somewhere around $385,000. Not a lot of fund balance. That is one piece of the fund balance. I'm not showing on the slide the designated fund balance for debt service. We have a debt service reserve of $288,000 in it. We have an unemployment reserve for $24,000 in it. So this is just the component piece that you look at when you're building the budget. This next slide is really trying to illustrate what we had started when we started the budget process. We started talking about the rollover budget gap. Everything stayed constant, everybody got their anticipated raises, factored in the extra costs for health insurance, retirement, all of that. We were looking at having somewhere in the neighborhood of a $3.5, almost $3.6 million budget gap. Based on certain things that we do know at this point, our draft one reductions, which we talked about in several of the preceding meetings, and will be summarized again later on, is a value of $1.684 million. You take that number and you take what we now know to be our savings for retirements as of today. That number is 1.455. You add the two together, you can see our budgetary savings is pushing over $3 million. Which, if you subtract that from the rollover budget gap, you would say, well, we're making relatively good progress. We're only $429,000 short. But there's the other component piece that we still have to look at, that being the revenue side. So that is our net budget gap. If you're looking at it strictly from a budgetary or appropriations budget. This is going to only get to the next slide. The results of the budget with this net gap amount is $56,035,482. kind of trust me in that number. I didn't bring all the backup of the data to show you that. I want you to see that moving forward. So now you can look at the revenues. Like I said, there's three component pieces: fund balance, expenditure budget, projected revenues. You have to have all three in order to figure out what you've got and what you don't have. Our revenue projections, this hasn't really changed since last time I gave you that one legal size report that showed all of our projected revenues. That's the same number, 22,603,338. That is our state aid, our sales tax, things we think we're going to do, our charges for services, interest, which is extremely minimal, fees, miscellaneous. That number, if you go back and look at your notes from last time, is still the same. What has changed, if you look, is on that projection. Before we had a little bit of idea how our fund balance was shaping up, we were showing the $1.7 million in appropriated fund balance to offset the real property tax levy. We look at that as a revenue. And you have to be able to come up with that at the end of the year. And again, how you get there is by generally understating your revenues and not spending all of your appropriations budgets. If you recollect 2 slides ago, that's not the way it looks like it's shaping up. We are coming in under budget with our appropriations budget, but we are unfortunately also coming in under budget on our revenue side. So that doesn't leave us with the $1.7 million as a revenue source. $750,000 is more likely a realistic amount of money that we are going to be able to utilize for the property tax. So you add the two together, and our total revenues is $24,353,338. So now we'll look and see how that affects the tax levy. Take our budget, we take off our revenues, we get the results in levy. Remember, all the levy is really what you're short between your revenues and your projected expenditure. That's all it is. It's not fancy. It's basically just your shortfall. That gets spread over all the townships within the district. You can see our resulting tax levy is greater than our tax levy limit with exclusions. This is if we were not going to require 60% of the vote. We're just going to go with 50% plus 1. That's our number. If you're going to consider exceeding the property tax levy with 60% of the voters, then we could go with 6, 7, 7, 8, 44. If the Board of Education chooses not to proceed in that manner, if you only want to have 50% plus 1, then you see that we have a gap of $873,920. Really, it's just the difference between the resulting levy where we are today and our total levy limitation. We are also including the proposed 1% restoration. Obviously, it's not a done deal. It's very favorable. The timeliness is very important. That isn't done in the sealed deal before we adopt the budget. Even if it is $150,000 more in revenue, you would have to go back and adopt the budget with greater. We would have to go back and re-adopt the budget if we wanted it to be useful towards the appropriation budget. Otherwise, it just would become fund balance, which in our case is not a terrible thing. That doesn't necessarily help you move into next year in control of the levy. So we're kind of looking at a budget gap, assuming that restoration comes through right now to be $723,000. Assuming the board does not want to exceed that, require 60% of the vote.
And this is without phase 1.
That is with phase 1 reductions and the retirements that have been.
And the 1% restoration will know by when? That's a definite.
Well, we're hoping to know by prior to April 1st, what we know at this stage, we know. And they're fully aware that school districts are starting to adopt their budgets, it's on their own time frame. But if it's going to
assuming we're also comfortable leaving $385,000 in our fund balance to help us with next year.
Yes.
That to me doesn't sound like a lot of money for a $57 million budget.
Well, it isn't a lot of money.
I mean, it doesn't give us a lot, we're not gonna have the flexibility of spending appropriating $750,000 next year when we have only $385,000.
No, that's not exactly how it works. You have to remember that every year is sort of an individual year. Because fund balance is a combination of whatever you project your revenues to be and how they come in and whatever you budget for and how much you expend. So what you're comfortable appropriating to offset the tax levy really can change every year, depending upon how you structure your budget, what your revenues really appear to be. So realistically, it's probably a more appropriate level to try to be able to obtain in this climate than $1.7 million. To get $1.7 million, you have to say you're going to have to budget for fewer revenues than you think you're going to get. You're going to budget for more appropriations than you know you're going to expend, and that's how you get fund balance. When your revenue is very limited, and you have to really be careful how much you can budget, it's very hard to produce fund balance. So reducing 1.7 is very difficult. It'll be difficult until state aid starts to flow here. $750,000 is much more. The thing you have to understand is that even though there's $300 and some thousand in fund balance, and though it's not a lot of money for your budget size, regardless of what you have sitting in fund balance, you will never be able to expend any more than what's been adopted and voted on by the voters. So even if you have money sitting in fund balance, $3 million sitting in fund balance, you can't overexpend your expenditure budget regardless. So is it helpful? Is it there for certain things? Yes. But you still can't overexpend your budget because you're obligated by law to stay within those constraints. The last slide here really is a summary. This has been included in that budget that we just spoke about. Looking at $700,000 deficit. So this is what we have called our draft one.
Phase one?
Phase one, draft one. Same thing. That is where the 1.684 is coming. And you've seen this summary slide before. There has been no change to it. The only thing we now know that we didn't know last time we met is the actual value of those records. That's the requirements for the incentive, and there were a few additional requirements for non-teaching staff.
Let me go on, and I'm going to identify some of the reductions. These are still draft reductions that are occurring. This is at the high school. So what we're doing tonight, if you recall, in the previous budget sessions, we've identified 5.0 FTE at the high schools to be reduced without identifying the specific areas. We've received the recommendations from the high school, and so the areas to be reduced, as you see on the sheets, 1.0 FTE in Spanish. And again, you see the rationale or the impact of the reduction. Part of that, and when I referred to the AP reduction earlier on, part of that is the AP Spanish 5. The enrollment over the past 2 years being 86 and 4. So again, we don't believe we're impacting a significant program. If we have more kids set to enroll, we'll take a look at how we may be able to advance the AP forward without a budget impact. Again, reduction of advanced Spanish 4, we have 2 sections of 20. They'll be combined into one section, and we expect fewer enrolled students in that section as well. Reducing the number of sections of Spanish 2 and 3, and then removal of the non-Region Spanish 3, because those students can be enrolled in Region Spanish 3. So that would be the 1.0 reduction in Spanish. We then follow that with a reduction of 1.0 FTE in chemistry in the labs, and through that, you can see the information listed there. We currently are on a 4-day cycle for labs, providing approximately 1,800 minutes per student annually. The state requires 1,200 minutes of students annually, and many districts have already moved to a 4 or a 6-day cycle rather than a 4-day cycle. So we're looking and recommending to implement the 4-day cycle, the 6-day cycle, and look at the 1,200 minutes that would meet student requirements still. 1.0 FTE reduction in health life skills program. This would carry with it. We did talk about this at length last year as well. This would carry with it the elimination of the life skills health requirement. That was instituted as a board requirement previously. So if we do reduce this health skills program, life skills program, then we would need to revise the board action and not have this be a requirement for graduation. This reduction would also eliminate the nutrition and stress management electives as well. The next reduction at the high school was 1.0 FTE in art. Again, this would mean a reduction in some of the 20-week art classes. We're investigating at this point the specific impact in terms of special areas or the specialty of the art teachers at the high school to see what exactly may be eliminated due to that reduction. And then also recommended was a 1.0 FTE reduction in music and band. Again, you see the rationale. Currently we have 2 band teachers at the high school. This will leave the high school with 1 band director, 1 vocal teacher, and a 25 vocal teacher. Lessons either larger in size or scheduled lessons. So again, I think that part of what we're looking here is we've gone through these reductions. Nobody likes to make the reductions regardless of the areas that we're impacting. But we're at the point now with the draft 1 reductions in order to continue with that $1.7 million reductions. These are the recommendations that are going with the high school 5.0 FTE. Again, draft 1, we're looking at, and I just wanted again to emphasize to the board that we have looked at and we are pursuing a $50,000 reduction in athletics. At this time, we are not making a recommendation in terms of specific teams or areas to reduce, but rather waiting until we have more information on the potential booster club and see how that fundraising can offset the $50,000 reduction. Moving on to draft 2, what we're looking at this evening is the potential reduction of almost $900,000 in expenditure reduction from the draft 2 perspective. I want you to keep in mind that this draft 2 is getting into areas that are going to affect us across the board, whether it's from a maintenance standpoint, whether it's from a student supervision standpoint, or whether it's from an academic standpoint. These are now starting cutting into areas where we looked at earlier not wanting to move through. So the first area that we're looking at in terms of additional reductions, and again, these would be reductions that are on top of the draft 1 reductions that we already have. The first area we looked at, I shouldn't say the first area, but the first one mentioned here is our facilities. As I mentioned before, our facilities overtime budget with only slightly over $6,000 overtime is terrific. One of the things that we worry about is we continue to make reductions, whether or not we're going to have to increase or maybe modify some of the overtime areas to make sure we're covered for certain events that may be taking place or for certain things that happen during the course of the school year. Again, we're looking at the reductions of the grounds crew chief, a laundry worker, and a laborer for a total of approximately $130,000 in the draft 2 budgets. This would require some operational changes in the reporting structure and in the structure of our facilities department that would be reported by and really drafted by Kevin Strong, who's the head of our grounds department. The next area we're looking at is further reductions in clerical staff, approximately 2.0 FTE reduction in clerical staff. This would essentially eliminate the position of clerk typist in the district. And we would have senior clerk typists as being the positions or the titles from civil service that would now continue with our clerical performance. Again, we're getting into areas that offices are going to have to be restructured, maybe schedules have to be revised slightly, take a look at how we can consolidate perhaps our services and have officers serve more than one department perhaps. Continuing on from the school support staff to teacher aides, we're looking for an additional 3.0 FTE reduction in school monitors and teacher aides. We're going to reduce the school monitor position. I believe that's one at the high school, and then that carries with 2.0 FTE teacher aides at the middle school from the classroom perspective. We're going to continue, and Colleen Haney is going to continue to review our special education program aides and look at potential reductions in special education. Our computer aides, we currently have 9 computer aides in the district. We're looking at a reduction of 3.0 FTE, which would bring that to 6.0 FTE computer aides, which would be the equivalent of 1 computer aide assigned per building. Looking at further reductions, this is where we're getting into some additional reductions from a staffing standpoint. First, from a substitute teacher standpoint, we're looking at a reduction of 200 days from our training component of the substitute teacher budget. So by eliminating 200 days, we save about $20,000. We're going to have to work through the issue of how we're going to train teachers in the various aspects of Common Core, student learning objectives, etc. But we believe we can, find some ways to do that, and at the same time reduce 200 days out of our budget. I think, Craig, we have 1,300 days budgeted. So we moved 1,300 substitute days to 1,100 substitute days in our budget. Elementary district-wide, with the reduction of classroom teachers, we are reviewing staffing in art, music, physical education. We're also looking at elementary health. I know we had a health presentation last month, but we'll look at the elementary health program and any other areas where you can see some partial reductions in staff to offset some of the decreases in the classroom reductions, but also look at, again, some budgetary and financial savings. Moving on to the middle school level, looking at the possibility of an additional 4.0 FTE. Again, some of the special areas that we look to be reducing. We may impact the foreign language through this type of reduction. For instance, one of the reductions in load could be the Latin program, and we would initiate by reducing the Latin program at grade 7, this for 2012-13, grade 8 for 2013-14, so we're not going to disrupt somebody who has it currently, but we wouldn't allow students in the program beyond this year. So those are some of the changes we're looking at. There could be the possibility of a move to a junior high schedule for grades 7 and 8. We would keep the team schedule for grade 6, but the potential of moving to a junior high schedule, which is more like a senior high schedule in grades 7 and 8. At the high school level, again, the draft 2 pieces are all, if necessary, depending on other areas that take place or other items that take place in the district, is a 3.0 to 5.0 FTE reduction. Our budget numbers reflect 3.0, so when you're seeing the reductions in terms of totals that this will carry, that will be at $165,000. Again, the reduction in staffing would occur in counseling, technology, English, social studies, and mathematics. Those would be the projected areas to be impacted. Another area that would receive an impact under a draft 2 budget would be administrative staffing. Again, to reach the goal that we have, this would require the elimination of the assistant principal position at approximately the value of $100,000. That would mean the reassignment of duties between Union Pleasant, the middle school, and the high school, because that's where the assistant principals are assigned at this point. Again, I want to emphasize that draft 2 reductions are those areas that we need to look at this point to close the remaining budget gap, and this really brings us to that close. We're hopeful that we can make these expenditure reductions through other avenues. The reductions that you see on draft 2 is not something that we want to do, but again, I go back to the time frame of April 17th, and that's when we have to adopt the budget. We have to adopt the budget within the guidelines that the Board of Education sets with regarding the levy limit. So At this point, we're proceeding to be within the levy limit, the maximum levy limit, which, as Barb has indicated previously, is approximately 4.5%, total increase on the levy, including all of the exclusions. So we're already at a fairly high levy limit. But whether it's this evening or at next week's budget workshop session, as we get more information, we should have some discussion and dialogue on the levy limit and where the board wants to go with that and what the impact of that will be. And if we need some additional information on that, we did talk about the voter approval of the district budget, but we can get some specific numbers for you if you want to review some of that at our next meeting as well. Any questions from the board on this current piece, Bob?
Steve, with the phase 2 reductions, that would close the budget gap.
Yes.
And is that assuming the $50, $75, or $100,000 reduction in athletic?
50.
50. Okay. So, all right.
Going back to phase 1, the 1.0 chemistry teacher, basically a proposal of reducing the lab from 1,800 to 1,200. Now, state mandates 1,200 minutes. Does that account for students that miss, or, how would they go about making that up? So if we reduce, I'm assuming that's why you have the 1,800 minutes in place now.
Well, I think our 1,800 minutes, it does accommodate that, but typically a student's not going to miss 600 minutes of lab time. What districts typically do that have the 1,200 minutes or close to that is offer makeup lab. So that is a common thing that happens in districts where the lab time is limited.
And can I just add to that, because I have labs. We have a 4-day schedule, so on the other days we have gym, and there's no classes that are every other day. So that kid normally has study hall, and the study hall teacher and lab teacher normally work together really well. So the student has always made up that.
Even with the 1,800 minutes already?
Yeah, there actually is a lot of time, believe it or not.
Barb, can you remind us if we upped our tax levy, if we upped our from 4.7% by 1%, 2%, how much more money does that bring in? About
$307,000.
Right.
About
307.
300
$307,000 for 1%.
per 1%. So it's going to take us a lot of increase in our taxes to our community to try to balance this remaining budget that's going into the second phase. We would be talking about 11% or something like that, something outrageous.
Well, you'd probably be somewhere around 7%.
Right. It's an additional 3% to offset what we have.
What's the
what we
second?
have right now.
In the second.
So 7.
So it'd be 7.5%.
And
Last
if
year
you-
we were at 6.45.
And if you go by last year's vote, it wouldn't pass.
Correct.
And if it doesn't pass by more than 60, go back to last year's budget.
That is correct.
Well, there's a revote.
You're welcome. It's much easier to do. You can go in your budget, of course, you know what you choose to do. You put your budget back out, you put the same budget back out, or you can modify it. And if it doesn't pass that time, then you go to this year's levy. So basically, 0% increase, which then price yourself basically significant cuts in that.
And in the phase 1, with the reduction in teachers, I think I asked this before, how does that compare to other districts in the area as far as class size goes? Are we above, below, at?
I think we're right in the middle. There are numerous districts who are fairly significantly above our class sizes right now. We had a substitute teacher candidate in who was subject teaching in another district who said their class sizes are all above 25 elementary level. At the middle school level, you get going up to 27 students in a class. So depending on the district, depending on what programs are operating, you're going to see a variation there, but I believe we are in very good standing at the elementary level. I think in grade 6, we're pushing our limits. If we take another reduction, we're back to 11. I think at the high school, due to these reductions, you're going to see numbers that will be averaging about.
Question on the middle school staffing with a junior high school schedule versus a team schedule that we have. Do we have any statistical evidence or some help understanding the difference between those two teaching methods, what the junior high schedule does versus what our performance level is? How long have we had this team?
Well, the middle school concept, gosh, I don't know when it was established here in Hamburg, but it's been in place for, pardon me? 1996.
Okay, and have we measured that this is a better?
No, we haven't measured. We haven't done any measurement in terms of student achievement or anything like that. I mean, that's some information we could pull together for the board if you'd like to see that. We could look at some achievement numbers. And we could also illustrate the schedule that would be put in place and the impact on staffing and how the kids would move through the day if you'd like to see that.
I just like to
Sure.
understand the difference between the two.
Okay.
Mechanically, I understand it, but educationally, are we gaining an advantage with what we have today versus a junior schedule?
Again, we wouldn't be doing this as an advantage. It's an economic, it's a financial.
Well, I realize that, but if we're spending more money, is this maybe a phase 1 reduction, where we could save some other things that are in the phase 1?
Not from our perspective, not from the administration perspective. It's not a phase 1 reduction. I mean, I'd be happy, I can work with Jen and John. We'll put some data together we can share with the board next Tuesday.
Anybody else interested in that?
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. We had discussed this at the last budget, I believe, budget work session, because, we all went to school in junior high. So, basically, if maybe you guys, or the experts can present to us why the middle school model is better than, and if we can save in phase 1 that way and restore some other things that appear to be being cut in phase 1, that.
We'll do that. We'll prepare that for next week, okay? Great. Good. Thank you.
We have 5 people who have asked to address the board. First person is Patricia, how do I say it,
Sachi.
Sachi. Who
Patricia
wants to speak
Sachi.
with us about the budget.
Yep, 23 Hunt Avenue. We wish to thank each of you on the Board of Education for your service to the district and for hearing the concerns of the citizens that you represent. We know you have a difficult job, more now than ever, and the countless hours that you volunteer on behalf of the students are greatly appreciated. As we are all well aware, the taxpayers of the district are facing difficult economic times now and in the years to come. And while we understand that we are continually expected to do more with less and that difficult decisions must be made, we ask that you consider working with the community to explore creative options and maintain all sports programs rather than cutting a select few that will adversely affect our children. As we have learned in the past, making such decisions hastily can cause division in the district and in our community. We wish to thank the superintendent, Mr. Stephen Akramovich, for meeting with us on Sunday evening. And together we brainstormed ways to reduce the athletic budget without arbitrarily cutting just a few select programs. Each student in this district deserves the same opportunities to participate in athletics and a healthy lifestyle without having to defend the value and integrity of the program that he or she participates in. Who are we to determine that football is of greater value than bowling? Our meeting on Sunday evening was very productive, and Mr. Akramovich agreed to postpone the recommendations of the athletic department while the district explores more equitable options and other sources of revenue. The community is dedicated to working with the school district to maintain extracurricular activities through the formation of a booster club. This would allow all sports programs to raise the needed funds while still reducing the budget. Again, we thank you for hearing our concerns and for working with us for the benefit of the children.
Thank you. We have Bob Beach.
We are in a tough spot. I'm going to speak to the budget and sports. I want to come from many different perspectives. The first one I want to talk about is from the perspective of a parent. I had two daughters. The first one graduated in 1990. The only sport she did was gymnastics. The second one graduated in 96. Also, again, the only sport she did was gymnastics. The second one went on all the way to college to compete in national championships in college. It was tremendous. Both of my daughters are teachers now. One in the city of Buffalo is a special ed teacher, the other one's 7th and 8th grade English in Elkiville. I really believe that it was through sports where they learned to be a team player and become leaders. Both of them were captains when they were in high school, and that leadership that they developed during that time was just tremendous. The second one is a coach. I've been a coach in the district since 1969. I've been the boys gymnastics coach since 1970. I helped start the girls gymnastics team, but I coached 5 other sports besides gymnastics, currently track and field. Each sport attracts different types of kids. I'm going to speak to gymnastics first. This year, I'll bet 50% of my kids that come out with team, BMX bikers, skateboarders, hip-hop dancers. It's a strange conglomerate. Where would those kids be if they weren't in the gym? Some of them got hooked on athletics and have gone on to other sports. Mrs. Sachs just spoke. Her son also plays hockey. 2 of the sports that were in possibly to be eliminated. If those kids are out on the street doing their skateboarding or whatever they do, you know, it's so easy to go over the edge and get involved in drugs or whatever. I was also a club coach for gymnastics. And one of the criteria that I heard floated around is if there's another opportunity somewhere out in the community. I don't know about all other sports, but my experience as a club coach was it's not the same as high school. It just isn't. At least in the gymnastics realm, the club is more like 5 or 6 kids waiting in line to take their turn. And everybody's just waiting their turn patiently. That's not like what the high school levels of gymnastics is really like at all. As a phys ed teacher, I retired from this school in 2002. And in 1969, when I started, this Hamburg Middle School was a PE demonstration center. We had phys ed every day of the week. We had a flag flying out front that people came from all over the state to see what we were doing here in Hamburg. It was amazing. The average score for a kid on a physical fitness test was in the 90th percentile. If we had somebody score